Hi, my name's Matt. I'm the head of marketing for Hone. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week. We are among friends today, and we have a really great discussion with Alisa Cohn. And we're going to talk about the journey that leaders take as they grow from leading a startup organization to a large enterprise, and it's captured in her new book, From Startup to Grown Up. And as an added bonus, we also have Hone's own CEO, Tom Griffiths, who has undergone this journey once before and is in the middle of that very same journey today. So
Not
this
quite
should be a
grown
really
up yet, definitely.
well, we're talking about the organization. Yeah, I think Alyssa's still working with you on that. At the end, there's going to be time for Q&A. So my job on today's presentation is going to be to make sure that I get all of your questions answered. So please put your questions in. If we don't get to them today, I will make sure we send you a note afterwards. And with that, let's get going. Alisa is an advisor to Hone and a friend, and she has an amazing book. Not to brag, but she's named the #1 startup coach in the world. She's featured in the New York Times, BBC, Bloomberg. She's a guest lecturer at Harvard, MIT, Cornell, and Henley Business School. And we also have Tom Griffiths, who is our own CEO over here at Hone. He's gone through this journey once before as the co-founder of FanDuel, and he's doing it right now. So Hone is a startup company. We've raised our Series A round. We're on the middle of getting much, much bigger. So he's right in the middle of this journey. So this should be a awesome, insightful conversation because he's living this stuff right now. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to these two wonderful people. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Great introduction. Really appreciate it. I've also been looking forward to this conversation for a while. As Matt mentioned, Alisa has been a friend of the company and an advisor for a long time, and she's been a personal friend for longer than that. So really looking forward to diving in. We've certainly had some great coaching conversations over the years, but I'm excited to turn the tables today and ask her the difficult questions. So Alisa, couldn't be more thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm so thrilled to be here. And does Matt get an A+ for that introduction? Amazing. Thank you so much, Matt. Yep. I know. I love the whole thing. And Tom, I'm so excited about having this conversation with you after, to your point, our long relationship.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I know from reputation, you're known for being a really experienced CEO coach. And as far as I know, life was pretty good as a regular, top CEO coach in the world. Why make life harder for yourself and actually start a book or write a book? What was the kind of prompt or the story that you felt you wanted to tell?
Yeah, it is indeed a good question. A lot of startup founders I talk to, they say, if I had known this, I might not have done it. And you may be able to relate to that too. And I would say the same of writing my book. If I had known what a difficult journey it would have been, I might not have done it. But what happened was I would regularly walk into new situations, especially as I started focusing more and more on startups. And I'd walk in and I'd say, how often do you meet with your leadership team? And they would say, what's a leadership team? Or, I'd say they'd be complaining about some executive they hired. And I'd say, well, did you hire them for that? And they were like, oh, no, I guess I didn't really hire them for that. I hired them for something else. And I kind of thought, gosh, I wish there were a book that I could just hand them, to prevent unforced errors so that we could get kind of a baseline of things and then work on additional things. So now I have a book that I can hand them that helps people understand what the journey is going to be and prevent, sort of unforced errors, as I said, and also teach a lot of the mechanics of what it takes personally, and then also like logistically and tactically to grow into world-class leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of the lessons are drawn from hard-won learnings through working with CEOs through many different ups and downs. But I think it's more broadly applicable, right? Like as an executive or as a manager, I felt a lot of the lessons in there were very relevant. And so I thought it was excellent and just very practical as well. There's like a whole section at the end with scripts on how to have difficult conversations. So if you're ever feeling tongue-tied in that hard performance conversation, definitely encourage you to go check out that section. I also really liked how it was organized. Three sections: managing yourself, managing them, as in your employees or your team, and then managing the company. So I had a few questions on each of those sections, if we can dive in. Starting with managing yourself is not something that every leadership book does, but is increasingly and incredibly important. Why start with managing yourself?
Well, start with managing yourself because the first person you lead every day is the one who wakes up in your pajamas. And that's the hardest person to lead also. So there's kind of two elements to that. You got to get your mindset right. You have to kind of, understand yourself, get into the right space. And then when I say understand yourself, you really have to have the self-awareness of what triggers you, what makes you uncomfortable, what brings out the best in you, what brings out the worst in you, so that you have that awareness, so that when you go into situations, you won't get, sort of surprised or overreact or be impulsive. The second thing I would say is that leadership, and certainly founding a startup, is the reason they call it a roller coaster is because it's a roller coaster. It is ups and downs and ups and downs. You can relate to that, right? And it's tremendous. The ups are tremendous and the downs are really difficult. And sometimes they happen like right on top of each other.
Yep.
And you have to have resilience for that journey. You have to have like sort of the grit to make it through that journey. And those are both of the elements of managing you that I wanted to capture in those two chapters.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly relate to the ups and downs and them sometimes overlapping, and it's kind of like a mind bender. But one of the things that I've appreciated about our relationship is, your mode of like real talk and not beating around the bush. And sometimes I think, when you ask startup CEOs or founders to reflect on what they're good at and what they're bad at, they're like, yeah, I'm great at all this stuff. And maybe there's a few things that don't matter that I'm not good at. But actually, it's really important to have those blind spots surface to you. And that's part of the value of a coach. Like, how does that process usually go and go down?
Well, there's a few ways, but the most common way I would say is to get 360 feedback. So 360 feedback is the input from all the people around you, right? So up, down, and across at 360 degrees is the degrees of a circle. So it's the idea of getting input from people who are all around you about what you're great at, what your superpowers are, and what you need to get better at. What are your development opportunities, weaknesses, obstacles, blind spots? Also, those people can give you a real clear roadmap about what will be helpful, right? Because they might say you're not collaborative enough, and say, okay, well, I think I'm really collaborative. Well, the behavior around what collaboration looks like might be different for them than it is for you. And the thing is that you are the expert on your intention, but everybody around you is the expert on your impact. And marrying those two and elucidating those blind spots helps make you a more effective leader.
Right. No, I hear that. And I think, it's not about perhaps people saying this person's a good coach or not a good coach, or this person's a good public speaker or a bad public speaker. Something I remember from the book is you directly ask people, what is one thing this person could start doing or stop doing that's more behavioral?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But to your point about blind spots, it's actually really confronting. I was in India long ago, a few years ago, and I was coaching the CEO, and I gave him his feedback. We sat there in the conference room and I gave him his feedback. And I said, here are your strengths, and you're visionary and you're passionate and you're super smart and strategic. And then here are some development opportunities that you can be a little quick to be upset with people. You can make people feel like they're being grilled. And sometimes you can come across as a bully. And he got furious and he stood up and he took the paper and said, this is nonsense. He said a swear word, but I won't say it now. This is nonsense. And he walked out of the conference room, and I thought, oh my gosh, what is going to happen now? And he came back in 45 minutes later and said, I just called my wife. She told me it's all true. So let's go through it. And the truth is that we don't see it, and only the people around us see kind of what's going on with us.
Right. Absolutely. I think, as a CEO as well, at the head of the company, it's a weird dynamic for people to give you that feedback in the run of normal business. And I think you need to create an environment where that's okay. But I think that's why it is sometimes a shock to the system when you do one of those 360s and a lot of stuff comes up. You kind of want to crawl into a ball when you hear it. But I think the reason is that, there's some truth to it. So, that's absolutely a great technique. I mean, are there some things that everyone struggles with that, they all think they're the only one, but actually it's a really common pattern?
Yeah. Yes. Everyone struggles, especially I would say startup founders in particular, but really all leaders, for not recognizing that their suggestions are orders. Their brainstorming are orders, their inklings are orders, and their orders are orders. And so the problem is that when you as the leader speak, and certainly you as the founder CEO speak, it's like you're standing up on a table with a bullhorn, kind of shouting down on people. And the other thing is that they will run off and do what you want them to do. So I tell the story in the book. One of the CEOs I work with, she had said they had a Christmas party. It was in Texas and they had it down the street. And she just mentioned, oh, that was so convenient. The only way it could have been more convenient was to have it in the parking lot. Ha 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 ha. Then in August of the fall of that next year, someone said, do you want a tent for the Christmas party? And she said, well, what are you talking about? They said, we're going to do it in the parking lot because you said you wanted it in the parking lot. So do you want a tent? So, she was surprised that they had taken her so literally, and she was just joking. But that is common. People want to please you. People run off and do the things. And now counter to that, another common thing. So strangely, even though they take everything you say so seriously as an order and run off and do it, also, you've got to keep repeating yourself over and over and over again. So they understand the abstract concepts. And so new people who didn't hear you last year or last month understand kind of what we're doing here. Because in the muck and mire of every day, when they're doing their job, the abstract mission and kind of where we're headed can get lost in the shuffle. So another common theme is you have to communicate more than you think you do.
Yeah, no, I
those
totally
two resonate with you, Tom?
So much. Yeah, so much. And I think certainly, the repeating yourself thing is really important because, say we write down our values and our mission statement and do a whole big effort with the whole team while we're 10 people, and we put it in Notion and we say, look, we've got it, box checked. And then you go hire 50 people, unless you're really hammering that home as part of onboarding and ongoing team calls, and just get lost in the mists of time. And so, yeah, you need to keep repeating. And then also, just the quote I like is from Jeff Weiner at LinkedIn, or was it LinkedIn? Right around the time you get sick of saying it, people start to hear it. So it's just kind of an unnatural act. Yeah. Another thing that's kind of an interesting balance for a leader, I suppose, is authenticity. And sometimes people say, bring your whole self to work. And so I feel like that's got, pros and cons. So I'd just be curious on your view of the, bring your whole self to work, being authentic, but also being kind of leaderly.
Yes, yes. There's such a, I would say, mythology around authenticity and authentic leadership. And there's a fine line because actually you, the leader, your best kind of moments are in your authenticity, when you care, when you're showing your humanity, when you have your little quirks, like your little personality quirks. Also, people, when they bring their best self, their true selves to work, they're going to feel safe there. They're going to feel confident, comfortable and loose, and they're going to have better ideas and creative ideas. And they're also going to want to give you discretionary effort. Those are good things. But you as a leader, especially, when you're bringing your authentic self to work and your authentic self is kind of grumpy, or your authentic self is kind of scared to death, which is normal for a startup because you should be scared to death, then you can't really bring that unvarnished to the people because you'll scare them to death. So people want you to be authentic, they say, but they really want you to be authentic. What that looks like is a real human being who cares about other people. And so I don't talk about authenticity. I do talk about humanity. So you've got to bring your human self to work with all your quirks and, interesting parts that make you you, because those are the access points to people getting to know you and build loyalty to you. And that really matters when the chips are down.
Yeah. Yeah. And agree with that. I mean, my wife's also a CEO and she was doing a big all hands yesterday. And she said, I nearly cried at the end of it because she was so grateful to the hard work that people have been putting in. And a few, people texted her afterwards saying, really appreciated seeing how much you appreciate us. So I think people do like seeing that human side of people. But it sounds like there's also something that you'd recommend people hold back. And that kind of reminds me, I suppose, of the coaching space where, it's oftentimes it's quite lonely at the top, and you can't share some of your deepest fears with your executive team or your employees or even your spouse or partner. So what do people tend to hold back that's kind of appropriate to hold back?
Well, I think it's appropriate to hold back, sort of your fears around. I'll tell you a story. There was one client I worked with, and he was actually having a lot of trouble for whatever reason, closing senior executive talent. So he raised a lot of money. The company was actually going great. And for whatever reason in his mind, he couldn't get himself to close executive talent, which is very strange. So I talked to him about it, like, what's going on with you? And in his mind, he thought, I'm pulling them away from their safe jobs to join us. What if we don't make it?
Right.
So there's a lot to say about that. First of all, you as a CEO may have these legitimate fears, especially early days, like, what if we don't make it? We might not make it. Walking around talking about that does nobody any good, doesn't do you any good, doesn't do them any good. Also, when you have something inside of you, it kind of leaks out when you don't surface it and you don't come to terms with it. So what we did together was we came to terms with his genuine feelings about this. That's what a coach can help you do. Like, let's surface them, let's process them. And then let's talk about reality. So in this case, reality is startups don't all make it. That is true. And also you may be pulling him away from this quote unquote safe job. That may be true, but does he have any agency in this, right? Does he maybe want this roller coaster or this exciting? Maybe he's worked at, what I always call IBM for the past 20 years and now wants the opportunity to try something different, to try to build something. And these people know the risks they're taking. So when you can kind of get it out of your inside and put it out there and resolve it, you're going to have a much better chance of acting as you want to act and not with kind of the demons and the fears that hold you back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that reality check is really helpful. Recognizing that there is risk here, but we're all adults and people have chosen to be on the journey. So, we should expect the best from people as we, at any stage in the ups or the downs. So I think it's a good transition to the kind of the managing them part, right? Like you might start a company because you're an amazing salesperson or amazing engineer, and very quickly you find yourself managing people for the first time sometimes, which is hard enough. And then later in the life cycle of a company, you're managing like high-powered executives who've been managing probably longer than you have. So what are some of the stumbling blocks or mindset shifts that people need to make on that journey?
Well, first of all, they need to kind of recognize that it is true. Just like you said, you're going to be hiring and then managing people who have done their job much longer, maybe than you've been working, and also are much more expert at their job than you are. By the way, that's good, not bad. You've kind of earned the right to bring on those kind of people. So I guess the first thing is to recognize that you need to learn management skills. Wherever you are in your management journey, your journey as a manager, it's always a good time to learn more manager skills. That's coaching and feedback, that's delegation, that's giving good performance reviews, sort of all the real ways that people experience you as a manager. Then when you're hiring more senior people, you have to make peace with the fact that, you don't always know. You've got to follow your instincts, know your company. Then it's very helpful to people around you who can show you what a chief marketing officer should look like and should be doing, who can show you what a CFO should look like and should be doing. And that way you build your own repertoire of an understanding of what that looks like. And then when you manage those folks, of course, if they're more senior, you think about, giving them the objective and letting them run. Hopefully they can do it. But zooming in if you need to get more in the detail, because that's the only way you're going to really know that something is it needs more attention from you. And don't be intimidated to do that, even though they're more senior and seasoned than you.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it's a challenging thing as a founder because you have these experts come in and you need to remember you're not expected to be the expert in that particular field. And it's okay to ask probing questions that get into that because things should still make logical sense and they should be able to explain decisions to you in a way that you understand. And they've chosen to join you, and you're the expert in the vision and the drive and the passion and the mission. So you can find the right balance, but it takes some practice.
Yeah, that's really well said. And also the distinction between when you need to zoom in and when you need to zoom out, and the normal feelings of insecurity that a new leader, a new founder, a new entrepreneur, first-time entrepreneur has in having those more intensive conversations with a senior person. You have to really practice that in order to be able to do it, because it's important. It's an important part of your job.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you ever seen it that someone couldn't make that jump to manager or to leader of execs, and what happens in that case?
Sure. I mean, I think what happens is that a founder or an entrepreneur will maybe say that what they will say is, I want to start this company. Great. And they might have in their mind's eye, I want to build this company, or they might think, I want to have somebody else build this company, right? I want to start this company. And so everybody along the journey has to kind of choose for themselves. I talked to a founder a few weeks ago, and he said, I finally, just because he's a 3-time founder, this is his 4th startup. I finally realized that I'm really good 0 to 50 million. And then after that, that's just not me. I don't want to do that. I want to find somebody else who can come in and be the person who can operate that consistently. That's again where self-knowledge is very helpful.
Yeah, pretty good skill set getting a company from 0 to 50 million a few times.
But not the kind of person who wants to manage the people we're talking about, right? The senior leaders, and kind of be more operational in that sense. Yeah. So, I think it's important for everybody to think about where their right skill set is, both in terms of where they can add value and also what brings them joy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it takes a few reps to really see what you really like. And then you can trust your gut on that, the next time. So we talked a little bit about kind of scaling companies there in terms of getting to the 50 million and things that change. But, what would you say as a company's going through hypergrowth, or even, from founding, are the inflection points in the level of leadership that's needed?
Well, there's a lot of inflection points. I mean, first it has to do just with figuring out if you can do proof of concept, figuring out if you can do this. That's kind of you and maybe 3 people, 8 people kind of tinkering with the idea and with the model. And then, talking to folks in the ecosystem. And then there's this, when you get into we're going to be a real company, the question is, can you raise money that you need to? That might be seed, might be friends and family. It might be a Series A. Do you have the skills to do that? The next inflection point is kind of getting to product market fit. So can you hire the right people and structure it from the point of view of having a kind of a going concern that has created something and can create it more consistently? And then the next stage is, can you do it at scale? So doing that one-off, let's say, bespoke for every customer, requires a certain skill set. It requires kind of agility. It also requires kind of customer focus to kind of see what people want and to be able to build that. It's the willingness to kind of try and figure out how to get that done. But then when you scale, there's no trying to figure it out. You've got to have a process. Right. You have people who enjoy process, who will activate that process, who will not think about their employees in terms of one-on-one, but think about them in terms of teams. And then from there, if you sort of think about exit in one way or the other, you need people who are going to have the communication skills and the maturity to either fit into a new company or possibly go public.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was a hard-won lesson in FanDuel, just learning the importance of process. And sometimes we say, when are we finished with the process? And the answer, of course, is never. It needs to keep getting better and better. But I was thinking also from a cultural perspective, are there certain kind of employee headcount milestones where the feel of the company changes at all, and how you can respond to that as a leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm curious how you experience this at FanDuel, but as the CEO, and by the way, we're remote now. So I think remote and hybrid environments and just figuring out if you're going to be, in real life together or not, that changes things. But when the CEO hires every person, mostly, and certainly knows every person, that's good for 50 people, maybe 70 people. But at some point, culturally, people don't have a personal connection with the CEO anymore. They just don't. Right. And you don't know them anymore.
Right.
And so now you have to have systems and processes and evangelists in place to make sure that culture is transmitted. It has less of a family feel, a little company feel. We don't all go to each other's weddings anymore or whatever. It's kind of a little bit more corporate. You do tend to bring in more seasoned people who are, let's call them older people. And that means they often have families and other things going on besides just hanging out with each other. So it kind of moves from this, we're all in this together gang family approach into something that's more systematized. And you need to have understands what the culture is around here, and people transmit it and they operate that way even when other leaders are not in the room. And it needs to also make room for newcomers, and that's also super important.
Yeah.
How did you see that at FanDuel, Tom?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it was a very different company to be building compared to now. Hone were fully remote. So I think some things changed, to your point. I mean, we were small for a decent while, call it, 3 or 4 years, sub 30, 40 people, while we were figuring out what this was going to be, and then just exploded from there to like 150 people in a year. And then within 9 months of that, we were 550 people. Like, we did 3 acquisitions in 6 months or something crazy. So I think there were those inflection points, and I think of the different milestones. They say, it's certainly a milestone as a founder or CEO when you're at a company event and you meet someone you don't recognize and you ask them, okay, so what do you do? And then it's another milestone when you're at a company event, you meet someone you don't recognize. They ask you what you do, because it's been so far removed. And so I would say kind of like the Dunbar number of 150 people was where we felt, at FanDuel at least, where culture is really kind of set. And I actually think that number's lower when you're remote, because there's not so many organic interactions. So we're at 60 now with Hone, and I feel like it's at that point where not everyone knows everyone anymore. And so we're having to create structures and breakouts and certain events to maintain that connectivity between the different teams. So yeah, very different in this world. And then the thing going to 500 from 150 is not only is most of the company new that year, but oftentimes the new people are being hired by new people. So how have you codified what it means to be at FanDuel or at Hone so that new interviewers can make sure they're selecting for the right thing to preserve the culture?
That's so well said. And that's it's so important. Do you want me to answer that, or is that a rhetorical question?
No, sure. No, I mean, is that a pattern you see? Like, there's the old guard and there's a bunch of new people, and how those dynamics play out?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote about this a bit in my book, because really you just need to be mindful of that. So just what you just said, the new people are hiring the new people. So we better train the new people. I have a whole, by the way, you'll be happy to know I have an entire chapter on training, right? Training matters. Yeah. So you better train those new people, not just in how to hire, which is the least of it, but it's how we hire. And it's also how we lead, and what our cultural values are and cultural norms are, and what to look for in those. And then you better make sure that you're kind of regularly checking in and calibrating how that's going. Amazon has that that thing called the bar raiser, where somebody comes in from the outside of that group and just does a check on bar raising. Is this person amazing in some different kind of aspects? Other companies would say, I can't remember exactly who this was, but it was, we, the co-founders, are going to make sure that we have an interview with every single one of the first 500 people that we hire. Now that may seem, onerous, but if you think you're building a massive enterprise, these first 500 people, all of them are your cultural co-founders.
Yeah.
So, it's really baking into the ecosystem the structures and tools, but also I think the intention around making sure that these new hires are maintaining and extending what you want to showcase.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting crisp on how you write that down, and it's unique for every company, and it's not the generic integrity, honesty. It's something that's meaningful to your culture and your people. So I'm glad you mentioned training, because as you may know, we're
Yay,
huge fans
training.
of training over here at Hone, and certainly the topics that you mentioned around coaching and delegation and feedback are kind of our bread and butter. But I also noticed in your book that you've got scripts and almost practice exercises that reminded us of kind of the practice labs that we do at Hone. So, what would you recommend to companies at this stage around the level of training and the types of topics they should be working on?
They should be doing manager training remotely and mobile with Hone, obviously. And also they should invest in manager training. So that's what, it's just to be astonishing how what companies do is they promote their great engineers, their great marketing people, whatever it is, to manage without giving them any sense of what management should look like. And or they hire or promote new managers, again, same thing, without giving them any sense of what management should look like. And it's just a waste. It's tragic in some ways, because we just, you lose people, you gum up things, you make things slower, not faster when you're trying to make them faster. But also, I'll say in general, if you want to keep your best people, then the most, every ounce of research proves that people leave managers, not companies.
Right.
And that people stay with managers, not companies. And connected management is actually the most important strategic advantage that you and any company will ever have. That's true in general. Now, if you take the war for talent, right, inside of the Great Resignation, that's even more true. So it's even more true now that it's so important to train your people both in just how to manage, how to take pride in the results of others, how to do coaching, how to give feedback, how to set goals effectively, how to hold people accountable without making them feel bad. But also, how do you have the special sauce of caring about your people, wanting for their success, being an ally, being supportive, doing career development with them? When you could train your people to do that, and then they do that and train other people to do that, you have suddenly a winning culture when it comes to management. And that is a strategic competitive advantage in today's world of the war for talent.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And, that's largely the founding thesis for Hone. Just saw how high leverage managers were when they were performing well. The teams are engaged, they're performing well, good times or bad. And when they're not, and you can't solve that with training, then it really just impacts everyone around them. So, our thesis was, it's the highest leverage point in a company. And some data that we were inspired by that backs up what you're saying about people leaving a manager is that across a huge sample size with Gallup, I think it was like 80,000 managers or something, you could explain 70% of employee engagement scores by the quality of the manager. So like the intuition is there, but it's also backed up by the data.
True. So true.
Yeah, really powerful stuff. Thank you. So we're going to go to Q&A in a moment. So I'd encourage folks to pop questions in the chat, and Matt's going to moderate that. But I did have one last one, because it's hard to be at work these days, and with everything that's swirling around us in the world, especially the crisis in Ukraine. And there've been several very poignant crises over the past couple of years that it feels like business leaders are expected to react to, for better or for worse. And so I would just be curious what counsel you give to leaders in how they approach these difficult, charged situations.
Yeah, it's an important question. We've seen a number of leaders really showcase their desire, willingness, and ability to speak out when, in these past few years when difficult moments have happened. And we've also seen a number of leaders who have said, philosophically, our job is not to speak out. So I'm really not the person to say which is right and which is wrong. I actually really respect both sides. You have a philosophy and you want to implement that. And it's important either way for CEOs, all leaders, to mind their people. So what that means is if people want to talk about it, how do you kind of create safe space and not have it kind of get out of control? How do you also help people feel safe in a world which is quite uncertain? How do you, a number of my clients have employees in the Ukraine. So now what do we do for them to help them get their family, to take care of their families, help them have resources and information that they need? So I'll say that one of my clients focuses on, we first and foremost care about the health of our employees and then our customers, and then our business. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of in that order. And that is
Yeah.
always the frame that they think about how to respond to various crises.
That's really nice. Yeah, I like that structure. And I think, like you said, there's two sides, or there's a spectrum of responses. And I think oftentimes if you've created a culture where you've got clear principles and you're acting in line with those principles, most people will accept how you are responding, but not everybody. And there's often some minority that disagree with the decision to speak out or to not speak out. And so, that goes for other cultural issues and cultural decisions as well. So, at times it can feel like the most vocal minority, and you're tempted to, manage to that as opposed to the masses. So I'm curious if you have any advice for dealing with that situation.
Wait, which specific situation? What do you mean?
Well, if you've got a vocal minority who disagrees with a particular stance on speaking out about a crisis, or even whether you should have free lunch on Wednesdays.
Right. I actually, long ago, I worked with a company that got acquired, and I was helping with the integration, and they were going to go to the grave for their Friday pizza. Like, we're going to keep our Friday pizza. The answer is that when you are a leader, it falls to you to make the tough decisions and to make people unhappy, unfortunately. And so you need to decide as a CEO philosophically where you stand and what you're going to do. Then the truth is, people want to be heard. They don't just want to vent, they also want to be heard. So sometimes the answer is, I understand this is important to you, message received. The thing is, we are going to go in a different direction, and here are my reasons. And I hope you can live with it. And so I think that kind of clarity of communication is both empathetic, and also it does take into account what they have to say, and also doesn't change the decision you're going to make. And then there are plenty of people, that kind of, if they don't want, one of the scripts I think I have in my book, and one of the things I think about is, the notion of content, pattern, and relationship. So content is, I don't like that decision, which I can understand. I don't like the decision, which I can understand. And then the pattern is, right, you keep telling me you don't like the decision, which I totally understand. I've communicated to you multiple times, that's the decision of the direction we're going in. And so I'm not sure if there's that much more to talk about, because until the data changes, the decision is going to stay the same. And I hope you can live with it. Right. And so the idea is that ultimately, if people can't live with it, they'll vote with their feet. But hopefully you kind of have created a company where the mission is compelling enough and the stickiness of their other employees is compelling enough to have people stay, even if they get upset about big decisions or pizza on Friday.
Absolutely, well said. And I think, in that you kind of demoed a bit of a script for how you could have those difficult conversations, which is something I really appreciate about your coaching style. So thanks, Alisa. Thanks for answering my questions. We want to bring in Matt to share some of the questions we're getting from the audience.
We've got several questions in the chat. Although I did want to address one thing. Risa asked if we could repeat the structure. And this was specifically the question around dealing with communication around crises.
Yeah. So again, I'll credit one of my clients, Augury, for creating this kind of structure as a template for themselves. We care about the health of our people, our employees, our people, the health of our customers, and the health of our business. So, by the way, those are all important things to care about. But that also is a great organizing principle for what you should care about. And then there's a lot of things inside of that you don't care about. Because when it comes to crisis, you've got to be clear about the sort of the framework and the simple things that you are going to focus your attention on.
Absolutely.
Great. Suzanne had her hand up, but I don't know if that was an automatic one. So if you can put your question in the Q&A. So the first one's from Jeff, and he asks, what are some of the most common areas, skills, or areas that you find that leaders need, or themes that you see as they move up in management? What are some of the most common ones?
Well, we've talked about a few of them. One is that they have to really shift their mindset from, individual contributor to manager to leader, increasingly taking satisfaction from the results of others and not from their own results, unfortunately, and increasingly shifting to a coaching mindset rather than a doing mindset or even a directing mindset. So that's very difficult. People learning delegation and the right level of delegation is very difficult. I have many clients who will say to like a very junior person, go do this. And it's like the most complicated, sophisticated thing in the world. And they don't check in and they get mad. Oh, they didn't do it right. I'm like, well, did you give them any instruction at all? And, kind of who are they? Like, did you think about who they are? And then there can be the other side of that, which is to very senior people, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, which also doesn't work. So it's about really thinking about who is my audience here? Who am I delegating it to? What is their experience level? What is their interest in doing this? And then how do I give it to them in the way which I can still keep my hands in as I need to with a light touch or a heavier touch? The other thing I want to say is that I think that a skill that leaders really underestimate is what I talk about in the book, which is positive feedback.
Yeah.
Positive feedback and praise, which is motivating. The thing is, if you as a leader don't give your people positive feedback proactively, you're definitely going to give them negative feedback. What that means is they're only going to see you when you give them negative feedback. So think about how that is in the world, right? How all your relationships are different if you only give them negative feedback. So when you give them positive feedback, you're kind of banking something in an emotional bank account. You're signaling that you care about them. And, Teresa Mablé, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, she did a ton of research on, she has a book out called The Progress Principle, which is basically the most motivating thing in the world for your people at work is making progress. So show them they're making progress. Be proactive in showcasing kind of what is working here. And then, of course, you've got to talk about what's not working from a compassionate and a point of view of ally. I think people think feedback is like blaming or giving a grade. And really, feedback is only to be given if you can change something and only if you want to change something. And that means you've got people's best interests at heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that. And I think I've seen some data that shows that the ratio of positive to negative feedback that's healthiest is somewhere like 3-1 or 5-1.
It's 5-1. 7-1 is even better. And this is research that's going to help you not just in your workplace, people, also in your marriages.
I was going to say, I constantly remind Carly of that one.
Right.
What you said earlier resonates with me as somebody who's built out marketing teams and has also been sort of the only person in the marketing team. You have to almost be conscious because sometimes I want to do what I think is helping and then I end up sort of doing the project, and that's clearly not delegation.
Right.
Okay, I have another question. This one's from Kevin. And he asks, is there a specific criteria for distinguishing when a company's gone from startup to grown up? I think Tom mentioned 150 being an inflection point. What are some of the inflection points? Employees, money raised, profitability? What do you see it?
Hi, Kevin. It's an interesting question because there are many companies who come over to me and will say, we've got 10,000 employees, but we still operate as a startup. Or, we've been around for 20 years, but we're still like a startup, like that. And then I think I recently talked to a company which has 50 employees, and they said, we're in our late teens. We're close to grown up. And I thought, well, I don't think so, but okay. So there's something there in the eye of the beholder. I mean, it goes without saying that I think a grown up, quote unquote, is a going concern. It's not like one existential event can now fell them, can now kind of screw it up. You're no longer living kind of hand to mouth or paycheck to paycheck metaphorically for a company. And so I think you need to have the notion of there's an operational excellence that is in place. There's structure and processes and tools which are in place, and that you recognize that there's not one existential crisis that will just, destroy you.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's certainly like the mindset shifts quite a lot from when everything you're working on is like live or die to now we're optimizing either product experience or growth rate. And I can distinctly remember at FanDuel where we used to say, oh, phew, we're not going to be a zero. We don't know how this is going to turn out, but we're past that point.
Right. That I would call actually late teens, at least
Right.
On the way to growing up. I would like to take the moment to ask Tom a question. Tom, I know. And Tom's like, oh, we're really going to do this. This is your second startup, but it's your first time CEO. I'm curious what you've brought from FanDuel that has really helped you because now you're an experienced entrepreneur, and also what has surprised you about doing this a second time, or kind of what rookie mistakes you think you've made.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, there's quite a few differences between the two companies, right? One, I was a co-founder but head of product. It was in the B2C space. It was started in a time where we would work in the same office. Hone, quite different B2B, CEO. But there are commonalities. And I think, management is one of them, like knowing how to build teams, knowing how to motivate people, knowing how to give feedback has been transferable for sure. I think some of the milestones that you laid out before around, figuring out which way is up and what problem are we solving first, then getting to product market fit, then early scale and optimized scale, still the same. And you can't skip steps ever, no matter how experienced or smart you think you are. And that's been a good reminder. But I think some of the things that have opened my eyes stepping up into the CEO role is just like the range of possibilities. It's like a complete blue ocean out there, and you need to figure out where you're going to sail, and everybody's going to come with you. But like when you're an executive or a team member, you've got some degrees of freedom, but there's still kind of a set direction. Whereas, just the choices available are so huge, and that's what I had to get comfortable with and learn how to just navigate based on values, based on mission, based on results and experimentation. Like, this is the way we're going to go, and let's commit to that.
There's so much to say about that. It's great. Thanks.
I've got one that I think is really interesting. So I think, Tom, earlier you mentioned how you go from asking people what role they play to them asking you what role you play in the company. Right. And so Jeff asks, is there, as a company grows beyond startup size, is there a point where you go from implicitly trusting people you work with because you know them to where it becomes a point of almost implicit distrust, where you feel like you have to get to know them to assume that they're on your side? And when does that happen? Is that expected?
Let's do a second session on trust. Like, yes, that's a big question, right? So trust is very complicated. The people who were in the trenches with you when you were 20 and 30 people, you may trust them quite a lot, and they just may not be the right people to be, right, operating when you're 500 people going to 2,000, right? It's just the truth. And so it's very difficult because on the one hand, you trust them, and they have so much loyalty for the company. And on the other hand, they're just not the right people to bring you to the next level. I just spoke on my podcast. The episode that's coming out next is with Elon Twigg of Trip Actions, the co-founder of Trip Actions. And he talked about meeting his co-founder, Alisa Cohn. And he said, I'm the kind of person who doesn't really trust. And so I didn't really trust him. And, I didn't distrust him, but I didn't really trust him. And it took this sort of, you should listen to my podcast to find out what it was. This kind of massive, important event, this cataclysm event that made him realize, okay, this guy's as driven as I am, and then I can trust him. Which also brings up, your makeup requires a set of things to help you trust people. So maybe it's, a certain, that they're always honest with you, or they go the extra mile for you, or, you have a similar sensibility. Maybe you're both kind of quiet, or you're both kind of aggressive. That might bring you trust. In Elon's case, in other cases, all I cared was drive. If this guy's as driven as I am, I trust. And so if you think about that, trust is very complicated with just a few people. Now you got to multiply that by all the people in the company. It's very difficult. And then you've got to, I think that's where communication comes up again and again, because people, unfortunately, with a human attribution error, they attribute to blank space kind of negativity or the worst case scenario. So you as the CEO, but then all of the leaders have to be super proactive in communicating what's going on. People don't fall into that paranoia state.
Yeah, I think a sister challenge to that is sometimes kind of silos inside a company where there's little cliques. And yes, one of the big values we championed at FanDuel and from day one at Hone is like one team, one mission. Because we're all in this together, like we all work at the same company, for goodness sake. Like, let's just, if we disagree on something, let's talk through what I've seen that you haven't seen, and vice versa. And remember that we're all aiming for the same goals, and let's make those goals as common as possible.
That's great and very powerful. Yes.
I have one. I think we only have time for one more question, unfortunately, because we're running out of time. But um, as as a company grows, of course, in startup mode, you have people that are operating basically in integrated roles that maybe you would have as a C-level person later on. So how do you coach leaders that are kind of going through that transition where they are moving their teams to kind of more specialist C-level roles, but have people who are there from the beginning that um, have sort of played those roles in the past?
So how do you kind of help them upgrade to the new role or adjust to the new role, or
Yeah,
unfortunately at times have to replace them, or both?
yeah, it's really a question of like navigating leadership roles early in the business and when you bring on that C-level role.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to know when you bring on the C-level role, but I think it's when you need it and when the people who are there have demonstrated that they can't do it. And it's no disrespect to them, they haven't done it before. They don't have the experience. So there's actually a script in the back of my book about that, which is like, how do you bring in a more senior leader on top somebody else? I think it starts with communication and being clear with what the expectations are for this role and what is necessary here, helping your employee, if possible, make that leap. And if they can't make that leap, I'll be open about it and, find a person. And then the script has to do with the fact that, I need you to know that we're going to be bringing this person. And the truth is that's good news, not bad news, because we've earned the right to get bigger and to bring in more senior people. I promise you, I'm going to bring in someone who cares about your development, is going to help you build these skills. Also, we always think, oh, they're going to react with difficulty to, oh, they're going to hate that. But I talked to somebody just a few months ago a very fancy Silicon Valley company, who said, yeah, I had like 5 different leaders in a span of like less than a year because they couldn't quite figure out where to put anybody. And they kept promoting someone. It didn't work out and it didn't work out. And I didn't know what was going on. And they finally brought in a leader from the outside. And on the one hand, I was a little upset. But on the other hand, he was fantastic. And my life is so much better now because I have this great leader who's managing us. So I think it's important to remember that people appreciate, back to management, people appreciate good management and leadership.
Amazing. Okay. Well, I think with that, we are running out of time. I just want to remind everybody who's still on, if you haven't, please go to the Type forum. Make sure you check that out. I've also posted links to Alisa's website and to her social media, so follow her on social. And of course, when we do send you a book, please leave a review. That would be huge.
And stay
Thank you
tuned
so
for my
much.
podcast, From Startup to Grown Up, because I think we're going to in the future have the amazing Tom Griffiths on it. I can't wait for
Yes.
that
There you
episode
go.
to come out.
Turn the tables back around, get back to normal. Yeah.
That's right, where I'm comfortable asking the questions.
Yeah. No, thank you, Alisa. I really appreciate the conversation, all your support over the years, and the fact that you're sharing your experience so widely. We really appreciate it.
It's been so great to be with you guys, and I love our partnership, and I look forward to great things to come.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.